thought that has been degraded by sin. When the heart is hard, the moral feelings are obtuse and blunt and often perverted. Well, I don't think that was really that bad, was it? And people say, oh no, no, of course not. And we plug into it and we encourage them like that. Instead of saying, well, you know, I love you for the sake of Allah. I want for you what I want for myself. And I think that Allah has blessed you to see something here in the unseen. And that's good that you feel like that. Inshallah, that will help you to grow in courage and strength and change your ways. The fact is, where the heart is hard, the moral feelings and perceptions are blunted, and consequently the great truths connected with the necessity of an atoning sacrifice are not appreciated. There are those of us who actually believe, I don't need to say I'm sorry to anybody. I don't need to ask anybody to forgive me. The only one who needs to know about forgiveness is Allah. What kind of heart thinks that way? If you've heard that before, raise your hand. Okay, I just want to make sure. I was working on this morning and I had such a realization of this truth. It was so painful for me. Because I do see this as a condition of our ummah. And then I don't want us to become like those people in the past because we can learn from them. When the heart is hard, the mind is unappreciative of ill desert. It is slow even to admit that it deserves damnation. And if compelled to admit it as an intellectual judgment, the mind does not feel it. It's not clear and keenly realized. Such a one will say, I cannot feel that it would be just in God to send me to hell. Atheism is on the rise, people. How many people will say, how many people have heard this? Well, I just don't think a loving God will send us to hell. What kind of heart thinks that way? Help me, please help me. Talk to me, folks. You're too tired, you're fasting. Let me ask you this, I know you're fasting. Are you getting it?
Yes.
Is it impactful?
Yes.
Are you going to walk away with something today?
Yes.
Yes.
A numb heart? I think.
A numb heart, yeah. We call it being, we call, the pain is so much that we don't feel anymore.
I don't think we tire, we're just astonished by the realization that is happening every day and every time, every minute of our lives, we see that.
Can I ask a question about
Yes,
this?
please.
Do you think that somebody who has a very soft heart might think that way?
I think if someone has a healthy heart before Allah, they can't think that way. If your heart is right with Allah, you cannot think this way.
Because when I do something wrong, I ask Allah for forgiveness very sincerely, but then I have hope that He will forgive me most of the time. Sometimes, of course, I'm afraid, but I have a lot of, when I pray to Allah, I feel more than anything, I feel protection. I feel like in front of Allah. Yesterday, for example, I was praying, and because of the fast, I was getting a little hypoglycemic, and in my second rak'ah, I realized that I had read the whole first rak'ah, not concentrating. And the first thought that crossed my mind is that, thank God, I'm praying to Allah who is forgiving, and not to a human being who would not forgive me ever. You know, so I feel like there is a lot of forgiveness in Allah.
And I think that's what I'm speaking to, and that means your heart is awake. But there are people who are not conscious. If we look at it, if you look at the Nafs Amara, the Nafs Lawama, and the Nafs Mutmainna, the Nafs Amara is an unconscious soul. That's how Allah describes it. It's not conscious that I've just sinned and I should get punished for that. It's like, oh, I didn't do anything that bad. And unconscious soul says, I know God said to do that, but I don't have to. And God would never say, I mean, a true God wouldn't send me to hell. I'll just justify everything. But if you really fear Allah, you're always living between that fear and hope. You love Allah and you are aware that you are supposed to obey Allah. And that if you don't, you're not going to feel good. You're not going to have integrity. When the heart is hard, the mind also is inappreciative of the compassion and forbearance of God. Being in a great degree blind to the nature and guilt of sin, having no appropriate sense and feeling of guilt. The compassion of God in sparing such a soul will not at all be appreciated. Will not be at all appreciated. Upon such a mind, the forbearance of God makes little impression. It is not seen, realized, felt. The will is so stubborn, the intellect is so unfairly used, and the whole mind is held in such a position by the force of the will that the feelings are very little affected in view of the compassion and forbearance of God. That's not you. You see, you just said that. You're ahead of me. I love that. In your prayer, you're totally conscious. May Allah bless you and continue to increase that.
So,
When the heart is hard, the mind is inappreciative of the love of God. To such a mind, this love is scarcely felt to be a reality. I've heard people say, I don't feel God loves me. If God loved me, He would have done this, He would have done that. Blah, blah, blah. Anybody heard that? Raise your hand.
no, anytime.
Is that the effect of a hard heart or not? Is that a healthy heart? It means that we really don't know a lot. And that's what this month is for us to get there. If it be admitted, it is not felt. It is not realized. The mind is not impressed and is subdued by it. The fact is, the soul is in the attitude of rebellion. It is committed against the claims of Allah. It is girded to maintain its position of resistance to Allah and His authority. In this state, the love of Allah is not so perceived, is not so realized as to melt and subdue the soul. You see, when the soul is melted, we cry. When the soul is melted and we talk about Allah and we talk about the Quran, it brings tears to our eyes.
Your soul is butter.
At room temperature.
Yes.
So that's where we want to be, folks. We want to be where our heart is like that. You know, and we resist that because we say, how will I deal with the world if my heart is like that? And you will. Yes, brother?
You know, a lot of this reminds me of like the effects of hardness of heart and everything. You know, it's very profound. Very, there's like a sense of false sense of a sense of entitlement, and at the same time, you ever heard? There's a slogan by Herbert Spencer. There is a bar against. There is a bar which is a principle against all men of ignorance and everlasting argument. And that principle is contempt prior to investigation. And that's like when I don't investigate something like prejudice, like hatefulness, like jealousy, resentment, that bombs this person because I really have not investigated. So once I'm content, that hardness of heart, that prejudice, resentment is there. False sense. That's what this all reminds me of. But very good.
Thank you. It's 1 o'clock. I have a few more slides. Do you want me to keep going since you're fasting? Or are you exhausted and you want me
Yeah,
to finish the class?
it's the first day of fasting, brother. We're
Say
not
that again, I
tired.
didn't hear.
We're not tired. It's the first
Keep
day.
going. If you'd like to leave, I respect that. But I just had this in my heart. I want to reiterate it. I think it's very powerful. I think it's something we need to hear. And I wanted to give you as much juice as I could give you since I'm not going to be giving any for 2 weeks here. Whenever the heart is hard, there is unbelief. And this unbelief in regard to the love of Allah, this withholding confidence in this love, this refusing to yield the mind up to its influence, prevents this love from overcoming and subduing the mind. The love of Allah should overcome. It should overcome our very actions. It should overcome our speech. So that when we are about to act in such a way, we so love Allah that we do what pleases Allah. Persons whose heart are hard will complain that they are not affected by the love of Allah. They are often not aware that it is their voluntary stubbornness that prevents their being duly affected by it. They seem not to know that they are closing the windows of the soul, that the love of Allah may not shine in and melt them. The love of Allah is what melts us. Our love for Allah, our love and our obedience, and of knowing Allah's love for us. They seem not to realize that they are holding their emotions all back, not allowing them to flow, not allowing their feelings to be aroused and quickened. They will even in this case complain of the hardness of their own hearts, meaning by this their unfeelingness in view of the love of Allah. And in this they overlook the fact that they are the voluntary authors, co-creators of this very unfeelingness of which they complain of or are unconscious of. When the heart is hard, the soul will not appreciate the guilt that is involved in neglecting to labor for the soul or the souls of others. What that brother does ain't nothing to do with me. That's the attitude. Now, if the city were on fire, and one that knew it should fail to give the alarm, and should see the city burn down, and hundreds of souls perish, there would be a general outcry against such cruelty. People generally would be shocked and even horrified at such wickedness. Souls may be asleep in their denial, and thousands of them may perish unwarned, unreproved, unprayed for, uncared for, and yet the guilt of all this neglect be scarcely realized or felt at all. This is owing to the hardness of the heart and the consequent unbelief and blindness to the soul. You talk to such people about their denial and they say, "What have I done? Whom have I injured? I have done wrong to no man. I have paid all my debts, and I have done my duty to my neighbors and friends around me." Let me remind you that the Prophet ﷺ's duty to his neighbors were 40 neighbors in front of him, 40 neighbors behind him, 40 neighbors to the east, and 40 neighbors to the west. Hardness of heart prevents the person from understanding really what his duty is. He satisfied himself with not having defrauded or with not having otherwise positively injured himself or neighbors. The law of Allah is to love thy neighbor as thyself. Want for my brother what I want for myself. To make all possible effort to save the soul of his neighbor. To warn, reprove, persuade, and use all possible moral influence to arouse his neighbor to secure the salvation of his soul. All this, the hard-hearted person is neglected. Many around him and many dead and in hell, and they believe they're okay. Maybe we didn't injure, but did we perform our duty to our neighbor? When the heart is hard, yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you. When the heart is hard, Allah will be neglected. Prayer will be neglected. Praise will be neglected. Obedience will be neglected. Love will be withheld. Gratitude will be withheld. And nothing will be present but cold formality and religious duties.
You look so pretty. I did not read
And I think perhaps of all the brainstorming, that paragraph spoke to me so loudly this morning at 3 o'clock. And I just have 2 more slides.
Yeah.
After you take a picture of that. You see, folks, I meet people that say, "I don't pray, but I'm a good person." I just want to tell you as an imam that if you do not pray, you've got to question, where's my heart? That I can't go to Allah and give Allah praise and glory when He's giving me breath and keeping my heart beating and keeping me healthy. The neglect will not be keenly felt as a sin against God, deserving punishment. This is a soul that is so hardened that it does not care for its rights or His rights, Allah's rights. God is dishonored or blasphemed, and this soul is not affected. This soul is no longer charitable. This soul no longer has a censoring spirit disposed to find fault and judgment, keen to make excuses. This soul is self-deceptive and spiritually blind and difficult to get along with. Irritable, maybe. Miserly, unwilling to do anything for someone for whom they have no particular personal interest. If anyone suffers, what's it to him or her? Confessions are dry, heartless, superficial, and often mixed with casting the blame on someone else. An aptness to indulge in resentful feelings, absence of the ability to love or show compassion, no brotherly love, no love for the sake of Allah. I love you all for the sake of Allah. I pray that this will be the best Ramadan that you've ever had in your life.
Inshallah.
I pray that your mind will come back to the things that I shared with you today, and that they will haunt you in the most loving and beautiful way toward spiritual growth, toward a softening of the heart. That when you come out of Ramadan, at the end of this Ramadan, that your heart will be different. That your heart will be soft. And that you will always put yourself in the shoes of other people instead of seeing yourself as so far above them. That homeless person, that mentally ill person, that person that might be a drug addict because of fetal alcohol syndrome. Maybe they had no choice in that. Maybe their mom was a drug addict and they came into the world a drug addict, not wanting to be touched. Having that kind of compassion. We will pray for you while we're traveling, and we ask you to pray for us. And we can't wait to get back to you. This is the only time we have ever traveled in the month of Ramadan in 27 years. Sorry, 30 years. And so it is bittersweet. But I do ask you to come, Imam Tariq knows to pick up verse 75 next week, inshallah. Come to the potlucks, connect with people. Come to the iftars, the iftars that are catered. If you are lonely, take the phone number of someone here today. Don't leave without the phone number of someone today. If every Sunday you go away with a new person's phone number, guys, guys, girls, girls. Okay? Go away with a new number. But don't just take it and stick it in the drawer. Call that person and say, I'm calling you because I love you for the sake of Allah. I want my heart to connect with your heart just for the love of Allah. I don't want anything personal. I beg you to take somebody's number today that you don't have their number and call them this week for the sake of Allah and give them some support. May Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We'll be back on the 18th, inshallah. And I'll see you on the 25th. And then we'll see you on the 18th.
Yeah, at the iftar. If the plane comes in on time, inshallah.